Wow, we got a ton of rain last night, which is kind of appropriate considering today's topic. Shall we? Whew. Well, good morning, dear confirmands. It is Wednesday, October 21st, and we're about to jump into class number 2. Last week, we started talking about the stories of God's saving acts, many of which have historically been told, right, as we talked about, one after the other during what is known as that Easter Vigil worship service, which would go late into the night, leading into Easter Sunday morning, as was celebrated in the ancient church, but is also still celebrated in many modern congregations. And of course, this was the service when all those new members, those new converts to the faith, would be baptized together, one after another, into the faith. And they'd then all celebrate their first communion together as they were drawn into that resurrection life of Jesus the Christ in God's church. And last week, if you remember, we talked also a little bit about what happens this year. I told you I'd commit to some things. I commit to teaching you, to helping you learn, to grow in your faith. And in response, I, of course, expect some things of you as well. Remember, I expect you to participate in these classes. For now, they are video classes. So you must complete every class every week, or every, 2 per month, whatever it ends up being. Every homework. I expect you to participate in worship every week, both online and in person, which of course are in the parking lot for the time being. And I expect you to serve as an acolyte when we're able to do so down the road. And I also expect you to complete sermon notes every week. And I'm thankful for the sermon notes I've received so far. Good work. So now, let's get back to God's story that changes our story. I want you to write this down. Stories do a few things, right? They function in certain ways. We covered this last week, but write it down here. Grab a pad. Stories communicate. Stories hold truth for us. They touch our emotions, and they build a sense of community. Now, last week we listened to and asked some questions about that first story in Scripture, the story of creation. And what did we learn last week, right? We learned that God has made the world to be good. And the God who loves us has made us very good, as God's own masterpieces, right? Beautiful, wonderful, amazing, impactful, unforgettable masterpieces, each last one of us, which is good news, saving news even, because it anchors us in our identity as beloved people. That's where life begins, in love. And so now, we take the next step. Story number 2, Noah and the flood. Perhaps the quintessential Sunday school story? But we're going to go beyond the basics of the cute animals and the big boat and those sorts of things. No, now we're going to delve into the deeper meaning of this story and how that meaning might connect to our everyday lives now. And so without further ado, I have a video for us. I invite you to watch and listen to the story of the flood as told by the Jesus Storybook Bible. Keep in mind, this video is a little elementary, but I think it helps establish the main thrust of the story in a helpful way for us before we delve into the full text itself. So if you would, click on over to that other video. I sent you the link. You may want to open another browser tab, over here or over here, or maybe open a second device if you've got a phone or a tablet or something that would help you to keep this video up and paused while you watch the other. But now, hit pause, and I'll see you in a minute. The flood. So this story, right, it tells about a world in which the people of the world were only doing bad things all the time. People had filled the world full of hate instead of love. Everywhere was death and disease and destruction. It said things that rob the world of life. And when God tells Noah then that a storm is coming, God promises something. Did you hear that? God promises something to Noah. I will rescue you, God says. Perhaps I will save you is another way to say that. And did you catch what this storm was going to do? It was going to flood out all the sin and death of the world, right? Wash away all the hate and all the sadness. And notice how Noah responds to God. Noah boldly does what is needed, even though it wasn't the obvious selection, the obvious choice based on the nice weather that was happening. But then what happens? The rains come. And 40 days go by. 40 days of flood. Of course, 40 is a symbol in the scriptures, a symbol of a season of change. It could be 40 days, 40 years. But regardless, things change here. But then the water recedes, and those on the boat are rescued. But if we begin to pull back some of the layers of this story, some of it can be kind of hard to hear, no? I mean, it's relatively violent. Does God really kill the whole world? We tend to resist the characterization that God is a violent deity high above on the throne who loves to squash us tiny humans. It's really not what we think God is all about. But we also do know that somehow God finds ways to undo the power of sin and death in the world. And I wonder if perhaps this story is one of the ways that we as God's people have tried to understand just how that all works. I mean, likely there was a huge flood event in early human history. I mean, there are flood stories in many ancient cultures, not just the one we have inherited. And it seems that people have for generations looked back on these legends and myths that came out of that cataclysmic event and have used these stories, these legends, these myths as a way to interpret what our current day hardships mean and where God might be amidst them now. And so that's part of what we're going to try to get at today and this week as we think about what this story means for us. So now again, I'm going to ask you to pause this video. And I want you to take some notes there on your notepad that you've got going. I'm going to flash these up on the screen so they're easier to copy down. But first, I want you to think about what is saving about the story, right? If this is a story about God's saving acts, how is this a saving act? What is God saving? Who is God saving? And then I want you to think about what good news is here. We asked this of the story last week as well, but what good news is here? And finally, how might that good news apply to our lives today? Go. All right. You should have already received the homework assignment to go with this lesson. It was there in the email. If you need it, let me know. And I ask that you spend some time this week together with your family, with your loved ones, working through these questions. I encourage you to pray together regularly as well, perhaps at the dinner table or before bed. Make a practice of it. And I invite you to continue discussing this story and listen then for insights as to what it means for us. I look forward to reading your homework, to hearing of your insights and what God might be revealing to you in the midst of all of this. And of course, we'll have another video ready for you in a few more weeks. And so until then, carry on, dear confirmands. God's peace be with you.